Well, thank you. Welcome everyone to the final installment, part three of our Postcards from Durham presentation from street historian John Shell. And my name is April Johnson, Executive Director of Preservation Durham. Um, and we are here with also Patrick Mucklow with the Museum of Durham History and presenting you with another installment of this virtual event. I want to welcome you and thank you. Thank you for supporting us. We are here to bring history to you in a safe way. And I will let Patrick introduce himself.
Thank you, April, and thank you, John. I want to thank everybody for tuning in the last couple of weeks. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate the opportunity to work with Preservation Durham and April anytime, and especially John Shelp too. It's always a joy to work with you both. And so we're grateful to be able to bring this to you, to the community, to give you an hour out of your day to focus on something else and to hopefully impart a little knowledge. And if you appreciate what we're doing, we want to be here on the other side of this pandemic, and we need your support to do that. And so we appreciate you going to the museum's webpage, going to Preservation Durham's webpage, and clicking the Give Now button and help support us. And on that note, I'd like to turn it over to John.
Gratitude, April and Patrick. This has really been a wonderful partnership between the Museum of Durham History and Preservation Durham. Good afternoon, good people. Thank you for joining us. This is our third week. Our first week we went through West Durham and saw Duke and Irwin Mills. Last week we went through River Festival, down through a little bit through downtown, and today we're going to continue our journey through downtown and then head out through Hayti and East Durham out to the tobacco fields, out towards that old state capitol, which was the last state capitol of Lower 48 to get an interstate highway, by the way. So April, let's get started. This is the United States Post Office. Beautiful postcard. Those are the lamps that used to be, those are the lamps with the white globes that used to be in front of the post office where 21C is now. It was built by the Works Project Administration in 1934. And this is, this is to bring to your next Zoom cocktail party. It was built with money from the tax receipts for 1 day of tobacco sales in Durham. 1 day of tax receipts for the tobacco sales in Durham. And behind the post office are these huge warehouses, Star and Liberty, and they're all gone now, but they were still here back in the early 90s. And I remember going to Liberty Cafe and ordering breakfast with a friend, and waiter brings out scrambled eggs and toast, and we asked for Donald orange juice, and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry," and he reaches into his deep pockets and brings out 2 cans of Donald Duck orange juice and puts it on the table in front of us. Those days, I think, are perhaps mostly gone, but that is the U.S. Post Office, Works Project Administration, right there on West Chapel Hill. All right, April. This is Main Street, looking east. So you're looking toward the courthouse. On the left is what is today One City Center. And I want you to look closely at the man on the far left of this postcard. Look closely at his arms and look at his face. And same thing for the man on the far right. Look closely at the arms and the face. And you will see that these hand-painted postcards have been modified, where someone has taken a white paintbrush, and there's hundreds and hundreds of these postcards available on eBay of this version. This is one of the most reproduced versions. But you can see that someone took a paintbrush with white paint on it and put a little dot on the faces of about 10 people in this postcard who are Black, which is, 1 block from Black Wall Street, which had 2 of the largest African-American-owned financial institutions in the country. So that gets to a little bit about the postcard distribution in Durham. There's dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of different postcards of Duke, and from the early days, only a very few of North Carolina Central. All right, so moving on, April. This is the courthouse. The first courthouse was in rented space in a music hall where One City Center is today. Then they built a brick courthouse here in 1890, and now this is the 1916 courthouse. And the top floor was the jail. So if you look closely, to the left of the front door, you'll see there is no Confederate statue. That statue was added later. It was not there at the beginning of the courthouse. Okie dokie. So April, thank you. This is Main Street looking west from the Melbourne Hotel. So we are standing at the corner of Main and Roxborough. So on the right, where the Melbourne is what I call the Michael Peterson jail, where the trial of Michael Peterson took place, Forest Hills. In fact, I went to his estate sale, Michael Peterson's estate sale, and bought, this is one of the books I bought at Michael Peterson's estate sale. And then on the left is the old courthouse. That's the YMCA right there on the corner on the left. And then just past that is the Lockmore Hotel. And then past that is the old county courthouse, which you see today. It's a cool postcard. It's looking back towards the west. See the trolley tracks there. And I just want to raise a point here. You know, we had tobacco in town. We had cotton mills in town. For many years, Durham had more millionaires than any other city in North Carolina. In fact, for a number of years, Durham had as many millionaires as the rest of the state combined. So take that to your Zoom cocktail parties. And I said this the first week, but Duke & Sons was one of the first 12 companies listed in the Dow Jones 12. So that's how big the industry was in town. Okay, thank you. April? Okay, this is downtown Durham. You can see in the background what is now 21C, and just to the right, Washington Duke, which we talked about last week. That's Harvey's Cafeteria on the right, but I want everyone to look at the Walgreens in the middle. That's the Walgreens in the middle. That is now a park next to Luna. But I'm going to talk about John D. Loudermilk. So John D. Loudermilk told me he was born on the kitchen table behind what is now Monuts. And he said he had a girlfriend in West Durham, a girlfriend in downtown Durham, and a girlfriend in East Durham. And whenever he went to go see his girlfriend in East Durham, he always stopped at this Walgreens and bought her a Baby Ruth. And then one day they were having a sale on flowers, so he bought her a rose and a Baby Ruth. And he wrote a song about it. It started playing on the radio. This is 1958. And he got a letter from the Baby Ruth Corporation saying, cease and desist. Well, they kept playing it for a while in some areas, and he got a second letter saying, oh, that's okay, keep going, you can keep playing. So Loudermilk, he visited a number of times. He's in the Hall of Fame for songwriting. He lived in many areas around Durham. His parents moved every year or two, it seems. He said the best place he ever lived as a kid was in Few Gardens in East Durham, which was the White Projects at the time. And he told me the story of delivering telegrams all over town. And one street in particular caught his attention. It was Morven's Alley, which is next to Morven's Cotton Mill. Morven's Cotton Mill owned the street, so there was no police patrol. And the way Loudermilk describes Morven's Alley, every house, the 12 houses, 10 houses, had drawn curtains. And he told me each house was either a gambling house, a liquor house, or a house of ill repute. And he delivered telegrams to the areas around. Today this would be near Highway 55 and 147. And that street, Morven's Alley, he told me, with the drawn shades, was his inspiration for the song Tobacco Road. Tobacco Road, performed by Lou Rawls, Jefferson Airplane, dozens and dozens of performers. In fact, it was just one of the songs on America's Got Talent. So, it's a thumping song about poverty in the South at the height of the civil rights movement, and it was performed at Woodstock, and it all inspired by Morven's Alley in East Durham. He also wrote the song "Turn Me On" by Norah Jones, the Norah Jones album that won 9 Grammys. And Loudermilk told me that he got more money for "Turn Me On" than all of his other songs combined. And I just want to end this by saying, I started to talk about this before. We have Loudermilk, who was, Hall of Fame, Tobacco Road, We have Don Schlitz, who I already talked about, grew up on 9th Street in a mill house, wrote The Gambler by Kenny Rogers, and for Mary Chapin Carpenter. We have Elvis Presley. Jim Wise wrote about Elvis Presley being in a caboose at Irwin Cotton Mills during his treatment. And finally, we have Blind Boy Fuller, the father of Piedmont Blues, and Gary Davis, Reverend Gary Davis. And they're honored with a marker in front of the Stanford Warren Library. So music in Durham is a rich history. All right, April. Let me know if you have any questions. First Baptist Church. This is not too far from Rue Claire. And the Baptists and other churches in downtown Durham, back in the day, they held their baptisms down at the creek next to the farmer's market. So right there in what's now Central Park is where many of the downtown churches had their baptisms. This is, later on they started having indoor baptisms. But that's a pretty cool nugget. I actually just learned that the other day getting ready for today's talk. And also there's a stepping stone in the garden of this church that they still have from the old days where, like people would maybe the ladies would get up on the stepping stone to get onto their horses or get into their carriages. And that's still in the garden there. And fortunately, my carpenter was a Baptist who worked on the addition of my house, and he knew I loved history. And when this church replaced their 1924 wood floors with wall-to-wall carpeting, I got the floors. So they're here. And as a friend of mine said, my soles are now closer to the church. April. So history is serendipity. Governor Moorhead, I learned this on a tour of Blandwood's estate in Greensboro. Governor Moorhead of North Carolina, the original plan was for the railroad tracks to go from Wilmington to Charlotte. So straight across the south of the state, Wilmington, Asheboro, Charlotte. Governor Moorhead said, let's take that railroad line and let's pull that up to the north. Let's pull the railroad up to Greensboro. And that's why you have this crescent of cotton mills, this crescent of cities, this crescent of economic centers, Raleigh, Durham, Greensboro, Winston-Salem, Kannapolis, Salisbury, down to Charlotte. That is because Governor Moorhead pulled up the railroad tracks. I mean, it's just an example of serendipity. So here, this is the DPAC today would be just to your left. And so this is the ridge we talked about, everything, most of these postcards are up on or near the ridge. And so all the rain that falls to the left in this postcard goes down to the Cape Fear River, down to Wilmington. And all the rain that falls to the right of this postcard downtown flows to the Neuse and Pamlico Sound. So that's the ridge between the two large river basins. And I talked about Durham College last year, which had a campus across the street here where the DPAC is today. And I got sidetracked and I started talking about the Muhammad Ali Gymnasium. I just wanted to correct the record because I started calling it, for some reason, in the middle of my talk, it was the Muhammad Ali Museum. It's the Muhammad Ali Gymnasium. So Durham College started with 5 typewriters just south of here on South Roxborough Road by Lucinda Macaulay Harris. At museum, there I go again, gymnasium, dormitories, administrative building, classrooms. And Muhammad Ali himself came to Durham in 1977 to dedicate the Muhammad Ali Gymnasium. And the gymnasium is still standing on Fayetteville Street across from the Chicken Hut. So I want to correct the record on that. I'm not reading a script here, folks. Okay, April. All right, so we've seen the movie The Green Book.
Oh, John, we have a question.
Yeah.
Vicky has a question, and she wants to know if there are any books on Durham's music history that you would recommend.
Yes. Well, I wasn't anticipating it, but it's Bright Leaves. Shoot. Sorry, Vicky, I can't grab it off the shelf. But it's Bright Leaves, and it's an extensive book about music and arts in Durham. It's called Bright Leaves. I actually helped the author pull some of the information together, but I don't want to keep turning around looking because then
April's got it there. She's got a copy of it.
Oh, good. Thank you, April. Look at you with all of your stuff right at hand. I feel like I'm in an Apollo capsule because I have like all these little tables around me full of stuff, but I don't have bright leaf.
You can order these from Preservation Durham. Just let us know. Send us an email at info@preservationdurham, and they're available.
Ah, I found it. Okay, so the Green Book, the movie The Green Book about places where African Americans could stay when traveling in the South. This was a big one, the Biltmore Hotel. All the famous musicians stayed here. And this is just, if you're if you're at the Durham Performing Arts Center, you can see this hotel from there. It's over to the right towards the railroad tracks. This was on East Pettigrew. It's a beautiful postcard. This was built in 1929, and the postcard on the back says America's finest colored hotel, and it was considered the finest hotel between Washington and Atlanta by many. So that's a drugstore on the left and a sandwich shop and grill on the right, and then you would go through the front door there to get up to the hotel rooms. And this was lost to urban renewal. So I talked about this a little bit last week, but again, I'll say it: promises made, promises broken. There were 500 families that were displaced by the Durham Freeway. There were 160 businesses that were displaced by the Durham Freeway. And sadly, I just went to see a talk about this, but it's actually Andre Van, my friend. 500 families were displaced and 160 businesses, and there are only 4 remaining businesses after urban renewal came through. Number 1, a white-owned tobacco warehouse. Number 2, a printing press. Number 3, St. Joseph's Church, which is kind of on the edge. And then number 4, the ABC liquor store. Those are the 4 businesses that were left after urban renewal. So promises made, promises broken. Those businesses, were never brought back. There was no effort to do that. And so that was a tragic chapter in Durham history. But this is on East Pettigrew, which is kind of near, I guess, not too far from the railroad tracks. So this would be facing the railroad tracks. All right, April. Oh, yeah, that's good. That's good. So this is the Stanford Warren Library. He was a successful businessman, Stanford, African-American. He was one of the founders of North Carolina Mutual and Mechanics and Farmers Bank. So he donated support for the library, and that's why the library has his namesake. In front of the library, there's a state marker we helped get for Blind Boy Fuller and Reverend Gary Davis, who live nearby in Hayti on Massey Avenue. And just as an aside, Stanford Warren was the son of Washington Duke. So absorb that information for a minute. All right, April. This is North Carolina College.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Someone said, John, Patty said, John, your stories of sitting and talking with John McDonald last week brought a smile to my face and a tear to my eye. Saturday afternoon milkshakes at McDonald's drugstore were a family tradition. We lost touch with John and Francis after they closed the store. Can you tell us where they are buried?
First of all, the owner of Vaguely Reminiscent and someone from the Behringer family and I worked together to save the counter, all the shakes. And we, after the store was closed, we went in there to pull it out and save it and put it in the warehouse. And all the bins were still filled with blueberries, strawberries, chocolate, marshmallows. And yeah, I took my kids there all the time. Francis was a loving aunt to my kids, and John McDonald was. I mean, he's the one that told me where the Irwin Mill Cemetery was. He was a wealth of knowledge. I don't know where the McDonalds are buried. I would guess. I mean, there's an old family that his father and I think his grandfather had McDonald's drugstore. So I'm sure it's local. You could probably find it on cemetery, on a cemetery search.
Yeah. There's one more question. Is there a picture book of Durham in the 1950s?
From the 1950s? I mean, I'll start off by saying Open Durham, which is run by Preservation Durham, where you can go to addresses and dates and look at different buildings around Durham. Nothing is jumping off at me, but there's, I mean, Joel Kostew. I mean, there are books that have been written more recently, not just the old ones by Boyd. And I mean, Jean Anderson kind of wrote her book just shortly, a little bit after that period. But I don't know if there's a book only about the 1950s. Of course, 1953 was Durham's centennial based on the arrival of the post office. So there's a lot of documentation of Durham in 1953 because that was the centennial for the post office. And I actually have a plate up on the wall of a Durham centennial plate that has in the middle Duke Chapel, and around the edges it has industry and education, hospitals, etc. It's a beautiful plate from 1953. All right, so there we go. This is North Carolina Central, the nation's first public university for African Americans. Andre Van, who I just mentioned, is a friend of mine. He's written he and Beverly Washington have written books on North Carolina Central and on Hayti, and I highly recommend these books to learn more about Durham's Hayti and North Carolina Central. Another book, which I just finished reading, is The Secret Game, about the basketball game between North Carolina Central and Duke. And it's a fascinating book because it's not just about the game itself, it's a lot of rich detail about life as a student at North Carolina College and at Duke, and history of basketball, and this, McClendon, the impact of McClendon on the game, with Coach McClendon on the game, was amazing. He's coach at North Carolina College, and he, until he came on, it was all about passing. And every time they scored a basket, you have to come back to the middle of the court and do another throw up, throw it up and do another, what the heck do you call that? My mind is blank. But every time you scored a basket in the old days, you have to come back to the court and do a tip off. But he changed the game where he had his students run, and run. He would run out, he said, east of campus, so out towards what's now Durham Tech, and get them in shape. And they could outrun any other team, and they dominated basketball for a number of years. And they beat the Duke team 88-44, something like that. And, every once in a while, it's not the Duke varsity team. Well, the varsity team lost to the Duke medical team. So this is World War II. The Duke medical team was made up of college superstars and others. The Duke varsity team was very good that year. They won the Southern Conference Championship, and the Duke medical team beat them. And then the Duke medical team went to North Carolina Central and was crushed by North Carolina Central, 88-44, something like that. And it was a secret. Shepard, according to the book, would have probably stopped the game if he had known it was coming. But students saw this weird car that showed up on campus, and all of a sudden they all started looking through the windows to see what was going on. But that's the Secret Game. That's an amazing book. At the end, they talk about one of the basketball players who was leaving campus to graduate, and the last thing he did was walk out to the sign on Fayetteville Street with a can of paint and paint over the sign out front said, like it says here on this postcard, North Carolina College for Negroes. And he went out with a can of paint and painted over for Negroes. That was his last act on campus. The building at the bottom here was called the Hoey Building, H-O-E-Y, after U.S. Senator Clyde Hoey. He was an interesting piece of work. He was a white supremacist. And so the Board of Trustees took his name off the building last year. But I'm in the middle of a book called The Lavender Scare. And everyone knows about the Red Scare and McCarthyism, but the Lavender Scare is Republican efforts to purge the United States government of gay men and lesbian women. They wanted to take back, they were sick and tired of FDR and Truman. They needed an issue. And so there was the Lavender Scare was kind of an issue they they wanted to create, and it resulted in suicide and a lot of people leaving. And the person in charge of that committee, like the investigation committee, was none other than Clyde Hoey. So good to NCCU for taking that name down. It's now the Shepherd Building. All right, so April.
John, we have a question from Neil.
Yes.
Any famous ghost stories that you know of about Durham or paranormal investigations at any sites?
Yes, I do. So Mary Cole and Maddie Riley. Mary Cole and Maddie Riley, 90 years old, were walking down 9th Street about 15 years ago, and they're just talking my ear off. They wouldn't stop talking. And Mary Cole's father ran I call it a pool hall, but she corrected me and said it was a billiard parlor. Ran the billiard parlor on 9th Street. And this is exciting. I'm going to show you what's in the billiard parlor now. And so we walk into the billiard parlor and I introduce them to the owner. And we look around. I say, look at the tin ceiling. It's still there. Look at these wood floors. They're still here, just like when it was a billiard parlor. And we go back out on 9th Street and Mary and Maddie stop talking. I'm like, finally, I said, what's wrong? What happened? What happened in there? And they said, well, John, this is a billiard parlor that had fights all the time. John McDonald came in and told me about breaking up fights in the billiard parlor next door. So they come out, John, we've never been in a tattoo parlor before. So it was Dog Star Tattoo, and Mary tells me the story. She was right across the street, and she said she was in a mill. Those are all mill houses over there, just like Don Schlitz, across from the Regulator. Those are all mill houses. She was in her mill house. She was up in her room, and she said, this is just a fact. This is just a fact. Ghost, she was in her room. The ghost came in the front door, opened the front door, walked down the hallway, walked out the back door, and went up to the mills. And she said that's what happened. Okay. So bring this to your next Zoom cocktail party. By 1905, more people in Durham worked in cotton mills than in tobacco factories. More into cotton mills than in tobacco factories, all right? So it was a big deal. What do we have here? We have Pearl Cotton Mill, which is right near Durham Gin Distillery in Durham Central Park. We have Durham Cotton Mill, cotton manufacturing, which is over in East Durham. Irwin Cotton Mills, a big one in West Durham. The mill village stretched from Duke Gardens to Monuts. And then down below, we have two more over in East Durham across the street from each other. So cotton mills were a big idea in Durham, and responsible for a lot of the economic expansion of Durham following the tobacco industry. Okay. So this is Golden Belt, still standing. Beautiful postcard, hand painted. This was a bag mill for loose leaf tobacco. So a bag mill, for years you have this cottage industry where women would sit on the porch and sew these bags, but they got stuck in the machine. So the tobacco industries, this was owned by American Tobacco eventually, built these bag mills. This is 1901. 700 employees here. They built these mill houses over to the right. Mostly women in this mill, making bags with looms. And I talked to mill workers in different neighborhoods here in the East and the West, and the ones in Irwin Mills told me they never, ever, ever again were going to paint their kitchens yellow or green, because the mills would come in and say, okay, next Wednesday, you all have to move to these other houses. And they would come in and paint every single house on the block, white on the outside, green and yellow on the inside. And for that reason, mill workers tell me they've never, whenever they move to another house, they never paint their inside of their houses green or yellow. So, you had these fireplaces, and every mill house had a fireplace. And here's some spindles and spools, part of my collection. And mill workers would put these wooden spindles into the fireplace as kindling. They'd also throw in their pattern cards. Pattern cards are like these cardboard pieces that you would attach to a loom to tell you whether to make a blouse with dots or a shirt with stripes. That's a pattern card. And so I was walking around an old mill village in Okanichi, and all that's left in the woods is a red fire hydrant. And every 75 feet, there's a pile of dirt. And those piles of dirt, I dug into them, are old chimneys, are fallen chimneys. So that's all that's left of the mill village, are those fallen chimneys. And what did I find in the dirt? Were these rings, these metal rings. And look what they were. They were metal rings from the spools. Those are the fireplaces. So they were metal rings from the spools that people use for kindling to start their fires. So that's kind of cool. Okay, let me see what else is going on here. Yeah. Yeah, so that loose leaf tobacco, that of course went out of style with cigarettes, with rolled cigarettes. So, there was a change in the economy. All right, April, any questions?
Yes, we have one question from Laura, and asking if the cotton mills were segregated or if they were mostly Black.
They were segregated by jobs. So they were mostly white. So in many cases, there were a lot of Black people working in tobacco factories, but the cotton mills were mostly white. Having said that, the cotton mills jobs depends what your job was. So at Irwin Mills on 9th Street, which is, by the way, where C.P. Ellis worked, the head of the KKK and famous for Best of Enemies with Ann Atwater, a wonderful, passionate advocate. The mills were segregated by job. So the good jobs went to the white people and the cleanup jobs went to the Black people. So you'll have pictures of employees of Irwin Mills on our website showing a company picnic where you have well-dressed mill workers, white and Black, enjoying a picnic together. I don't know if they weren't at the same table, actually, now that I think about it, but it was a company picnic. I mean, the companies, mill villages were different from tobacco factories, and that mill villages had, swimming pool, tennis courts, health, zoo, baseball, which you didn't have as much with that sense of community with the tobacco industry in town. Okay, so this is one of my favorite postcards. I think it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, this is a Durham hosiery mill #1. And take this to your cocktail party, people. I'm giving you lots of information here for your cocktail conversations. Durham hosiery mill #1. There were 15 Durham hosiery mills. #1. Durham hosiery mill #4 is what those people over there call Carmill Mall. Carmill Mall is not Carmill Mall. Carmill Mall is Durham hosiery mill #4. So let's get that straight. I told that to the mayor of Carborough. He didn't seem very interested. But they're going to have to change their name anyway to Venable or whatever name they're going to have to change it to soon. I'm sure they will. But this was built in 1900. And by 1920s, they were already in trouble. Why? Because women were not as interested in buying cotton stockings. What happened to decimate the industry? One word: silk. And once silk was introduced, these hosiery mills started to fade. And in fact, this one closed in 1934. So right there in front of that postcard is that dirt road is Anger Avenue. And so over to the left, it goes over towards the corner. And that's the corner of Anger and Driver. And Anger and Driver is a lot like 9th Street. It was the center of a cotton mill village. You had company store, you had private stores, you had a union hall, you had pharmacies, you had grocery stores. And so on the corner, you actually, on this corner of Driver and Anger, you had 2 pharmacies, one across the street from each other, Crabtree and Sullivan's. And the pharmacies had an agreement where they would alternate Sundays. So there would always be one pharmacy open on Sunday, but they would alternate Sundays so they didn't have to both be open. There's a wonderful description of 2 sisters going to drink a vanilla Coke at one pharmacy and then crossing the street and drinking another vanilla Coke at the other pharmacy. Again, on Open Durham, a wonderful local resource. So today, So the two pharmacies today, Sullivan's Pharmacy is now East Durham Bake Company. And what was Crabtree Pharmacy went on to become Joe's hot dog stand. And Joe was married to a judge, and he was the bodyguard in his earlier life, he was a bodyguard for Whitney Houston. Okie dokie.
You have a question, John.
Yes.
Liam asks, have you thought about putting these images on a map, or have you already done that? Geo mapping the images? That's a good idea.
I'll work with my good friend Nick Levy at Open Durham. We'll work it out.
Yeah, we talked about doing something like that.
We are talking about doing a couple of tours, which I've started working on. But that's a lot of work, Liam. I know you, Liam. I know who you are. He's pushing my button right now. All right.
I do have one other question.
Yeah.
Jan asked, who owned the Durham Hosiery Mill?
Julian Shakespeare Carr. And his house was not too far away. His house, we talked about in the first week, was where the Durham Police Station is today, Somerset. And again, remember the KKK funded white supremacist groups, funded behind the white mobs at Wilmington. Boasted about beating a Negro woman when they dedicated the Silent Sam statue. And the guy who saved the UNC alum who saved Duke from bankruptcy. Okay, so now we're going to head out into the tobacco fields, stretching towards Raleigh. All right, and after World War II, things started to slow down around Durham. I mean, industry started to suffer. By 1957, North Carolina had the second lowest per capita rate in the country. So only Mississippi had a lower per capita rate than North Carolina. We were kind of going downhill. What was happening is that students, would get their college degrees and get out of town as fast as they could because there were no jobs. So Raleigh, like I said, was the last state capital of the lower 48 to get an interstate highway because, by the way, they did not want one. So think about that. Durham the tobacco industry was slowing down, the textile industry was dropping faster. Chapel Hill was a small village out on dusty 54. So the area was in decline. 1957, the Russians launched Sputnik into space. First man-made object in space, the size of a beach ball. Freaked out the United States government. The United States government said we have to spend more money on science and research. So that's setting the tone for what's coming next, because right now things were in decline. All right, April, and let me go through these slides without questions if you don't mind, because I want to kind of get a groove going. So enter Romeo Guest. Romeo Guest, who used to build cotton mills. Think about this. The connections in history are wonderful. And serendipity. He used to build cotton mills. He saw the writing on the wall, stopped buying cotton mills, and instead bought cheap tobacco farms in pine forest out in the middle of nowhere. And he even put a name on it, Research Triangle. And so this is Chemstran, one of the early RTP companies, pretty small at the time. RTI, of course, was the first to be out there. Actually, their campus started near Durham Tech, and they were very small at the time. I mean, their first contract was $4,000 to look at morbidity in Tennessee. All right, so you have Research Triangle Park limping along for like 8 or 9 years. It wasn't growing, it wasn't succeeding. In fact, it was a for-profit enterprise, which alarmed a lot of investors, and so it really wasn't working for a while. And then April, there was a secret meeting at the College Inn in 1960. And it was Governor Terry Sanford, and Robert Kennedy. Terry Sanford, governor of North Carolina, went on to become president of Duke University, and he met with Robert Kennedy. And they decided to keep this quiet. He liked Robert Kennedy. The account I read is that Kennedy forgot his belt and he was sick. He had a cold. And so he kept pulling up his pants and he kept sneezing and only had soup with Terry Sanford. But they met in a room at the College Inn. And of course, I have for everyone a key from the College Inn. The College Inn was on Hillsborough Street near NC State University. And Terry Sanford met Robert F. Kennedy, and they kept it quiet for a number of weeks. And then Governor Sanford shocked the political world when he endorsed John F. Kennedy for president at the Democratic National Convention. He came back to Raleigh and he had a desk full of death threats from people in North Carolina because he went ahead and endorsed a Yankee Catholic for president. So, so in the end, Kennedy squeaked past Nixon in 1960. It was like, I'm making this up, it was like 49.6% to 48.8%. But he squeaked past Kennedy and he squeaked past Nixon, carried North Carolina, and won the election. Okay, and let me quickly add, Nixon, who was a law student at Duke, was campaigning in 1960 in Greensboro, and he said, quote, in a speech, "Everything I have done in my life and everything I will ever do in my life is all because of Duke University." So Kennedy won, and go ahead, April. On his last day in office, he announced that the National Institutes of Health was coming to Research Triangle Park. And this is a big deal. NIH is the world's largest funder of biomedical research. And if you look at the PBS documentary, Governor Sanford, Progressive South, it ends with a grainy black and white photograph of the NIH in Research Triangle Park as his legacy. So this was the first major organization to announce they were coming to the park. You know, like I said, RTI was much smaller at the time. They've gotten bigger. But this was the first major organization to announce. 6 weeks later, IBM announced they were coming. And it was that 1-2 punch that RTP took off. And again, like I said, you know, there was a brain drain. Students were leaving. And this changed everything. All right, April. So this is Raleigh-Durham Airport. This is a postcard. That terminal and that tower there, that was actually just torn down just recently. They've been there for a long time, just to the left of Southwest Airlines. But IBM said they would not come to Research Triangle Park unless the state built an interstate highway between Research Triangle Park and the airport. And so that is the beginning of I-40. That's the beginning of I-40, is because IBM said they wouldn't come. And Raleigh finally got their airport. So, and Raleigh finally got their interstate. So if you all have any questions or concerns about traffic on I-40, call IBM. All right, April. So today, more than 50,000 people work in Research Triangle Park. More than 50,000 people work in the halo around Research Triangle Park. Simply put, it's changed the course of history of North Carolina, because we have all these jobs now. And now what's happening? Raleigh is booming, Durham is booming, Chapel Hill is booming. And you know, those pattern cards I talked about back at the cotton mills, the pattern cards for your stripes and polka dots, those pattern cards are the precursor for IBM punch cards. And lastly, let me say this about some of the research going on out there. You know, in a town, you know, in Durham, the Dukes used to control the manufacture of 90% of the cigarettes in the world, 90%. Headquartered in Durham. Some of the factories were elsewhere, Richmond, Reidsville, et cetera. 90% of the cigarettes in the world were controlled out from Durham. But thanks to secondhand studies funded by the NIH and others that found that secondhand smoke causes cancer, today in Durham, you cannot smoke on a sidewalk. It's against the law. That's how fast the policy has changed from the science to public health. All right, so we will which brings us to the present, where history is still taking place. This is a postcard of Irwin Cotton Mills on 9th Street. And it was just taken a short time ago, but if you look there now, you'll see a Harris Teeter, an Envy Massage Parlor, Berkshire Apartments, and 9th Street Station. So history is happening as we wait. I do want to point out that neighborhoods in this town do have a voice that you don't see in other towns. I mean, we can find out about a cement plant being built and we can stop it in 5 days. You know, we can stop Duke from building a Barnes & Noble down the street from the regulator. We can stop the asphalt industry from practicing environmental racism by building up to 9 asphalt plants in East Durham. Stop Duke from closing Maxwell Street. So that's good about Durham because community voices do have a strength here that you don't see in Charlotte. You know, in Charlotte, where are we going to put the football stadium? 5 guys get together, let's put it right there. Done. Here, that's different. I will say a big disappointment, a big dark chapter in Durham history just happened last year when Duke killed Regional Rail. That does change that. That takes a hit to the community involvement, but I think we'll get over that and move on. I mean, after all, we sold Duke Irwin Soccer Field, which they really wanted in the center of Central Campus, but they couldn't give us a sliver of their golf course on the corner. But that's a conversation for another day. Okay, so we'll end on the road where we began. This is the very end of old NC-10. We started 3 weeks ago at the beginning of NC-10 on the Tennessee line, and here we are following it right through Durham and down to the coast. It's from the mountains to the sea, and it's the first highway in North Carolina, and it went right down Main Street, following that ridge through downtown Durham. Okay, you want to slip to the next slide? And I will say thank you everyone for listening. We have about 10 minutes to go, so I hope we have questions. I see 19 chats and 6 queues. We have questions.
John, we did have a question from Nora. Was that the IBM building in one of the?
That was Burroughs Welcome, which was what is the name of that movie? Brainstorm? Burroughs Welcome. GlaxoSmithKline. It became GlaxoSmithKline, and now someone else just bought it. I forget, but it's an architecturally, it's a pretty well-known, innovative design for its time.
Another.
I will say I'm very excited because the postcards, you know, this is a great thing about collecting postcards is you can still add to your collection. So look what I just got today in the mail. This just came in the mail today. It's a postcard that shows both Duke and Sons next to the Chesterfield and the Old Bull down by the DPAC. And what's cool about this postcard, it was taken a long time. It was printed a long time ago because the factories are 4 stories tall instead of the 2 stories you see today. But you know, they keep coming, so it's a delightful thing. It's all going to the North Carolina collection at the Durham County Library. Already been signed off. Yes, Patrick. Yes, April.
I have a question here that says they have Peter has a question about the structures on the lawn across from Durham Hosiery Mill, number 1. Are those supports for young trees?
Yes, they are. They're tiny little trees. And there's also some similar photographs along Club Boulevard where these trees were planted, I think, that are now, of course, huge and 85 years old. But those are little trees, that's right. So that was right across the street is still right across the street from Golden Belt. That's a senior living center. And Golden Belt, of course, has offices and entertainment areas and artists, Golden Belt artists. My postcard of Golden Belt is actually blown up and framed on the wall there outside of Dog Star Tattoo.
John, we have a question from Fowler C on Zoom, asking if you know the names of the 4 establishments that lasted through the development of Highway 147.
The 4 establishments that survived 160 businesses were taken out. 4 survived. A white-owned tobacco factory, which is still standing there. It's the Venable Center. So it's right there across the railroad tracks on East Pettigrew. Number 2 was a printing press, and I forget the name of the printing press, but it was near the Carolina Times, which is in a Tin City building. Tin City was a half-hearted attempt to do something. And then 3 was St. Joseph's Church on Old Fayetteville, which is over on the edge. And then 4 is the ABC liquor store. And that is from a talk with my friend Andre Van. Andre and I served on the mayor's Sesquicentennial Honors Commission together, and we honored 150 of Durham's most important historic figures for last year's 150th anniversary of Durham. So Andre is a friend. I've gotten to know him even more, and he's a great resource for history about Hayti and Durham.
Okay, I have another question from, this is from Facebook. Michael asked, is there any information on the Picketts of Pickett Road that you know of?
I know him. He used to come to Preservation Durham lunches. Nice guy. They still owned the house back in 1990. This is 1999. They still owned the house, and we used to exchange emails all the time. It's kind of dropped off. I have I don't remember. I don't know what's happened to him, but I knew that young man. He was a really nice guy. He's a plumber, and full of history. And his mother or his grandmother was living in the Pickett house on Pickett Road, right there near the Green Monster. It has another name, but I'm not gonna. This is family friendly. Quickly, April and Patrick.
I think for me, that's all of the Facebook. Liam just wanted to say he wasn't pushing your buttons. He just thinks he think it would be amazing to see it, the locations on a map, and that you're such an engaging speaker. Great job.
Thank you, Liam.
I think that concludes the questions on Facebook. I think we have just a couple of more in Zoom. Let's see. Jerry asked, did the hosiery mill number 1 sit empty until it transitioned into a residence for seniors and disabled?
No, it was, I just read this morning. It was storage. And then American Tobacco used it so American Tobacco ended up buying it and used it for, National Guard. So the National Guard stayed there for a number of years. And then it was a storage unit, I think, for American Tobacco. And then it became senior housing. I might have missed something in there in the middle.
Okay. Well, I would like to say thank you all. Someone said, what was the last photo a picture of? Do you mean?
That was Morehead City. That was Morehead City on the Atlantic Ocean. And what I was just trying to do there was finish the opening. So the opening postcard was Old NC-10, the first highway to cross the state on the Tennessee border. And the last postcard was Old NC-10 on the Atlantic Ocean. And that was the crescent of cotton mills and economic centers that are along Old NC-10, that are along roughly the railroad tracks. And I kind of want to build a thread through the presentation and bring it up at the end. And I do want to say, April and Patrick, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I want to quote Mayor Steve Schul, who said, love your family like never before.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Well, thank you all for joining us and supporting our organizations. As you can see, our Durham story is still very important during and after the coronavirus pandemic. So continue to support organizations that bring these stories to life. I believe personally that it's very important to connect these places to our stories. as they inform us about the lives of people who lived before us and help guide our present and future. So thank you very much. I'm April Johnson with Preservation Durham, and
I'm Patrick Mucklow from the Museum of Durham History. John and April, as always, thank you so much. And to folks, thanks for tuning in. And when it's safe to get out there, please go and explore your community, because there are fascinating stories around every corner.
yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.